Welcome, or welcome back, to the channel. Tonight's episode features 5 true horror stories confessed by security guards. I'm your host for today, Nick. If you enjoy true horror stories that help you relax and fall asleep faster, please consider subscribing to the channel. We upload once, twice, or even 3 times a week. If you have a true horror story you'd like to share and be featured in a future episode, feel free to send it to our email. Now grab a pillow, wrap yourself in a blanket, relax, and let the sound of raindrops guide you as you listen to tonight's stories. Sleep well and enjoy. I've been working as a security guard at St. Catherine's Medical Center for almost 3 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Drunk patients trying to leave against medical advice, families getting into arguments in the waiting room, the occasional confused elderly person wandering the halls at 2 in the morning. Nothing that ever really shook me. But what happened during my shift last month changed everything. I still come to work, still walk these halls, but I don't see this place the same way anymore. It started on a Tuesday night, the kind of shift where the hospital feels almost abandoned. The day staff had gone home, visiting hours were over, and the building had that hollow, echoing quality that only comes after dark. I was doing my rounds on the 4th floor, the oncology ward, when I noticed something odd. Room 412 had its door slightly ajar, and I could see the lights were on inside. According to the chart by the door, the room was supposed to be empty, undergoing deep cleaning after the previous patient had been discharged earlier that day. I pushed the door open wider and called out, "Security? Anyone in here?" No response. The room looked normal enough, bed stripped down to the plastic mattress, the small closet standing open and empty, but there was something off about the atmosphere. The air felt heavier somehow, and there was this smell, not the usual hospital antiseptic, but something sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers left too long in a vase. I checked the bathroom, looked behind the curtain, even opened the closet door wider to make sure no one was hiding. Nothing. I was about to leave when I noticed something on the whiteboard where nurses usually write the patient's name and their nurse's name for the shift. Someone had written in shaky, almost childlike handwriting, "Don't forget about me." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was from the previous patient, someone in the late stages of their illness, confused and scared. I erased it, turned off the light, and made sure the door was securely closed before continuing my rounds. The rest of the 4th floor was quiet. I checked the nurse's station, where Lisa, the night shift nurse, was reviewing charts. "Everything okay up here?" I asked. She looked up, gave me a tired smile, and nodded. "Quiet night, thank goodness. We've only got 6 patients on the floor right now." I mentioned room 412, asked if she knew anything about the writing on the board. Her smile faded. "That room's been empty since this morning. No one should have been in there." I assured her it was probably nothing, maybe someone from housekeeping playing a prank, but I could tell she was unsettled. Lisa had been at St. San. Catherine was longer than I had, and she knew as well as I did that housekeeping didn't work nights, and they certainly didn't write cryptic messages on patient boards. I moved on to the 3rd floor, the surgical recovery wing. This floor was always dimmer at night, with most of the lights turned down low so patients could rest. My footsteps echoed on the linoleum as I walked past room after room of sleeping patients. Some had family members dozing in chairs beside their beds. Others were alone, connected to various monitors that beeped softly in the darkness. I was halfway down the hall when I heard it, a child's laughter high and clear coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, my hand instinctively going to the radio on my belt. The hallway was empty. I stood there for a long moment listening, but heard nothing except the ambient sounds of the hospital, the hum of machines, the distant ding of an elevator. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish even as I did it. This was a surgical floor. There shouldn't be any children here at this hour. Pediatrics was on the 2nd floor, and they had strict visiting hours even for parents. I walked back the way I'd come, checking each room as I passed, looking through the small windows in the doors. Everyone was asleep or looked like they wished they were. I was about to write it off as my imagination when I saw her. At the far end of the hallway, standing in front of the emergency exit, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, wearing what looked like a hospital gown, her long dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She was facing away from me, completely still, and even from a distance, something about her presence felt wrong. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice gentle so I wouldn't scare her. "Sweetie, are you lost? Where are your parents?" She didn't move, didn't turn around, didn't give any indication that she'd heard me. I started walking toward her, my shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. As I got closer, I realized how odd her stillness was. She wasn't fidgeting, wasn't shifting her weight, wasn't doing any of the little movements that living, breathing people make without thinking about it. When I was about 10 feet away, she turned her head, not her body, just her head, rotating further than any head should be able to rotate, until she was looking at me completely backward. Her face was pale, almost gray in the dim light, and her eyes were wrong, too dark, like looking into empty wells. She smiled at me, and I saw that her teeth were stained with something dark. I stopped walking. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I was frozen, my legs refusing to obey. She tilted her head to the side, that unnatural smile never wavering, and then she spoke. "Are you going to forget about me too?" Her voice was raspy, like she hadn't used it in a long time, and it echoed in the hallway in a way that didn't make sense, as if coming from multiple directions at once. Before I could respond, before I could even process what I was seeing, she turned completely around, her body following her head in one fluid, impossible motion, and then she was gone. Not walking away, not running, just gone, like she'd never been there at all. The emergency exit door stood closed and locked, its alarm indicator showing it hadn't been opened. I stood there shaking, my heart hammering in my chest so hard I thought I might pass out. I grabbed my radio with trembling hands and called down to the main security desk. "Mike, this is Torres on 3. I need you to pull up the cameras for the south hallway, surgical wing, right now." There was a pause, then Mike's gravelly voice came back. "What's going on up there?" I didn't know how to explain what I'd just seen. "Just pull it up, please." "Last 5 minutes." I waited, staring at the spot where the girl had been standing, half expecting her to reappear. Mike came back on the radio after what felt like an eternity. "Torres, I'm looking at the footage. You're the only person in that hallway. Been that way for the last 20 minutes. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. "That's not possible. I just saw someone, a little girl in a hospital gown." Another pause. "Brother, I'm telling you, there's nobody on this footage but you. You feeling all right?" I told him I was fine, that I'd finished my rounds and we'd talk about it later, but I wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. I forced myself to walk down to where the girl had been standing, half expecting to find some evidence that she'd been real, footprints, something, but there was nothing. Just the locked emergency exit and the empty hallway. I should have reported it, should have told someone what was happening, but who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. Instead, I finished my rounds on autopilot, checking doors and windows, documenting everything in my log except what I'd seen. When I got back to the security office, Mike looked at me with concern. "You sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Maybe I have." I tried to forget about it, tried to convince myself it was stress, lack of sleep, maybe I was coming down with something. For the next few shifts, nothing unusual happened. I did my rounds, filed my reports, went home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, especially on the 3rd and 4th floors. Sometimes I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow that shouldn't be there, or I'd hear that child's laughter echoing from empty hallways. Then, about a week later, I was checking the 4th floor again, and room 412 had a flight on. My stomach dropped. I approached slowly, every muscle in my body tense. The door was ajar again, and I could hear something inside, a soft scratching sound, like someone writing on paper. I pushed the door open, my hand on my flashlight like it was some kind of weapon, and there she was. The little girl from the 3rd floor was sitting on the stripped hospital bed, her legs dangling over the edge, not quite reaching the floor. She had a crayon in her hand, a red one, and she was drawing on the wall beside the bed. She didn't look up when I entered, just kept drawing, her movements deliberate and focused. I could see what she was drawing now, stick figures, dozens of them, all lying down in rows like beds. Above each one, she'd drawn a red X. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She stopped drawing and looked at me with those dark, empty eyes. "Keeping track," she said. "Someone has to remember." I took a step closer, and I could see her more clearly now. Her hospital gown was old, the style they'd used maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and there were stains on it, dark brownish stains that I realized with horror might be blood. "Remember what?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. She gestured to the walls, and for the first time, I noticed that the drawings weren't just where she'd been working. They covered every wall of the room, hundreds of stick figures, all with red X's over them, all lying in neat rows. All the forgotten ones, she said. All the ones who died alone. No one came to see them. No one held their hand. No one remembered their names. She looked back at her drawing. I was one of them. Room 401T, no family, no friends, just me and the pain until there wasn't even that anymore. Felt sick. "What's her name?" I asked, trying to keep her talking, trying to make sense of this. She tilted her head, considering the question like she hadn't thought about it in a long time. "Sarah," she finally said. "Sarah Chin. But the nurses called me the girl in 412. That's all I was to most of them, a room number. I'd worked in hospitals long enough to know how easy it was for patients to become just diagnoses, just room numbers, especially when they were alone, especially when they were dying. It didn't make it right, but I understood how it happened. The system was overwhelmed, understaffed, and somewhere in all of that, people got lost. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sorry you were alone. I'm sorry you were forgotten." Sarah looked at me, and for just a moment I thought I saw something human in those dark eyes, something sad and scared and so very tired. "You see me," she said softly. "You remember?" Then she smiled again, but this time it wasn't the horrible rictus grin from before. It was the smile of a little girl who'd just been given something she desperately wanted. "Thank you." The lights flickered, and when they steadied, she was gone. The drawings on the walls were gone too, leaving only clean white paint. The room was just a room again, empty and waiting for its next occupant. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand if any of it had been real. I went back to the nurse's station, where Lisa was still on duty. "Can you look up something for me?" I asked. A patient named Sarah Chen would have been here maybe 15, 20 years ago. Room 412. Lisa gave me a curious look but turned to her computer, typing in the search. After a moment, her face paled. "Oh God," she whispered. "Sarah Chen, age 8, leukemia patient. Died in room 412, October 2007. No family listed, ward of the state." She looked up at me. "Why are you asking about this?" I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't tell her that I'd just been talking to a ghost, so I made up something about finding an old medical bracelet, wondering if there was family we should contact. Lisa shook her head. "After all this time, I doubt it. Besides, it says here she was cremated, ashes scattered by the state. No one claimed her." She paused. "It's so sad. Just a little girl, dying alone in a hospital room, no one to hold her hand or tell her it would be okay." That's when I understood. Sarah wasn't haunting the hospital out of anger or malevolence. She was here because she'd been forgotten, erased, reduced to nothing but a name in a database and a line in a record book. She was making sure that didn't happen to anyone else, keeping track of all the forgotten ones, all the people who died alone in these rooms, making sure someone remembered they'd existed. After that night, things changed. I started paying more attention to the patients I passed on my rounds, especially the ones who were alone, especially late at night. I'd stop and talk to them if they were awake, ask their names, listen to their stories. It seemed like the least I could do, and I never saw Sarah again, though sometimes I still feel her presence, especially on the 4th floor, especially near room 412. But that's not where the story ends. A few nights ago, I was doing my rounds on the 3rd floor when I heard it again, that child's laughter, but this time it was different. It sounded lighter, happier, not the eerie echo from before. I followed the sound to the pediatric wing, where I found a group of nurses gathered around the nurses' station, watching their monitors with confused expressions. "What's going on?" I asked. One of the nurses, Jennifer, pointed at the screen. "We keep hearing a child laughing on the baby monitors, but when we check the rooms, all the kids are asleep. It's been happening for the last hour." As if on cue, we all heard it again, that bright, joyful laughter, and this time I recognized it. It was Sarah, but different, the way she might have sounded before the sickness, before the loneliness, before everything that had turned her into what she'd become. The laughter faded, and I looked at the nurses, all of whom looked thoroughly spooked. "Maybe it's just interference," I suggested, knowing it wasn't, knowing exactly what it was. Sarah was still here, still watching, but she was different now. Being remembered, being seen, had changed something fundamental. She wasn't the angry, forgotten spirit anymore. She was just a little girl, playing in the halls of the hospital that had been her last home. I still work at St. Catherine's. I still do my rounds, still check the doors and windows, still file my reports. But now I make sure to remember the names of the patients I see, especially the ones who are alone. I write them down in a small notebook I keep in my pocket, and sometimes when I'm on the 4th floor, I'll stop by room 412 and I'll read them aloud. A litany of the people who passed through this place, making sure they're not forgotten. And sometimes, when I do that, I feel a small hand slip into mine, cold but gentle, and I hear a whisper, soft as breath, "Thank you for remembering." Then the hand is gone, and I'm alone again in the empty hallway, but I don't feel scared anymore. I feel like I'm doing something important, something that matters. That's my story. That's what happened to me at St. CC, Catherine's Medical Center. I don't expect you to believe me. I'm not even sure I believe it myself sometimes. But I know what I saw, what I felt, and I know that Sarah Chen existed, that she mattered, that her life meant something even if it was cut short and spent in pain. And as long as I'm working here, as long as I'm walking these halls at night, I'll make sure she's not forgotten, and I'll make sure that no one else is forgotten either. Because in the end, that's all any of us really want, isn't it? To be remembered, to know that our lives mattered, that we left some kind of mark on the world, no matter how small. Sarah taught me that. A ghost taught me what it means to be truly human. And every night when I walk past room 412, I remember her name, I remember her story, and I make sure that somewhere someone knows that Sarah Chen was here, that she existed, and that her life, however brief and painful, mattered. I work security at Riverside General, a massive hospital complex on the edge of the city. It's one of those places that's been expanded so many times over the decades that it's become a maze of corridors, connecting tunnels, and forgotten wings. I've been here for 5 years, and I still discover hallways I've never seen before. But there's one section I wish I'd never found at all. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I got the call from dispatch. There was a door alarm going off in the old East Wing, the part of the hospital that had been closed down for renovations about 8 months ago. Supposedly they were going to turn it into a new cardiac center, but the funding fell through, and now it just sits there, dark and abandoned, waiting for someone to figure out what to do with it. I grabbed my flashlight and headed over, cursing under my breath. The East Wing was a pain to get to, requiring me to go through the basement level and take a service elevator that barely worked. When I finally reached the entrance, I found the security door propped open with a chair, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Someone had deliberately opened this door, and they'd done it recently. I radioed it in, and dispatch told me to do a sweep, but not to engage if I found anyone. Probably just kids looking for a place to get high or homeless people seeking shelter from the cold. I pushed through the door and into the East Wing, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The power had been shut off when they closed this section, so the only light came from my flashlight and the dim emergency exit signs that ran on battery backup. The hallway stretched out in front of me, lined with empty patient rooms, their doors standing open like mouths. The air was stale and dusty, and I could hear the building settling around me. Creaks and groans that in any other place wouldn't bother me, but here, in this abandoned wing, they sounded almost alive. I started checking rooms methodically, swinging my light into each one, calling out, "Security?" as I went. Nothing but empty beds and medical equipment covered in plastic sheets. I was about halfway down the hall when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just a hint of something wrong underneath the dust and disuse, but as I continued forward, it got stronger. It was the smell of rot, of organic matter breaking down, and it made my stomach turn. I followed it to a room at the end of the hall, room 127, and when I shone my light inside, I saw something that made no sense. The room was full of flowers. Not fresh flowers, but dying ones, wilted and brown, arranged in vases and bouquets that covered every surface. There must have been hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all in various stages of decay. Some had been there so long they'd turned to powder, just brown dust in the bottom of cracked vases. Others were more recent, still holding some semblance of their original shape even as they withered away. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty room. "This is security. If someone's in here, you need to come out now." No response. I stepped into the room, my boots crunching on dead petals that had fallen to the floor, and that's when I saw the cards. Every bouquet had a card attached, and when I got close enough to read one, my blood went cold. To the one who died alone in room 127. "I'm sorry I wasn't there." That was what the first card said. I picked up another, then another, and they all said variations of the same thing. Apologies, expressions of guilt, messages to someone who had died in this very room. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that the cards were all addressed to different people, different names, as if dozens of people had died in this room and their loved ones had all come here to leave flowers and apologies. I backed out of the room, my heart racing, and continued down the hallway. The smell of rotting flowers followed me, seeming to grow stronger even as I moved away from room 127. I checked a few more rooms and found them empty, but in each one I noticed something odd. There were marks on the walls, scratch marks, like someone had been clawing at the paint. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterns, almost like writing, though I couldn't make out what they were trying to say. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were coming from deeper in the wing, from the direction of the old surgery suites. Slow, measured footsteps, like someone taking their time, not trying to hide their presence. I called out again, "Security, identify yourself." But the footsteps just continued, getting closer. I shone my light down the hallway, but I couldn't see anyone, just the empty corridor stretching away into darkness. The footsteps stopped right in front of me. I could feel the presence of someone standing there, close enough that I should be able to see them, close enough that I could hear their breathing, ragged and wet like fluid in the lungs. But there was no one there, just empty air and the smell of rotting flowers so strong now that I could taste it, sweet and putrid at the same time. Then I felt it. A hand on my shoulder, cold and heavy, the fingers pressing into my flesh with a grip that was far too strong. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting wild arcs through the darkness, but there was nothing behind me. The hand was gone, but I could still feel where it had touched me, a cold spot that seemed to sink down to the bone. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran, sprinting back the way I'd come, my flashlight bouncing crazily as I fled. Behind me I could hear more footsteps, dozens of them now, all moving in different rhythms, all following me. I burst through the security door and slammed it behind me, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get my key card to work to lock it. When I finally heard the bolt slide home, I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. I called dispatch and told them I'd cleared the east wing, that the door alarm must have been a malfunction. I didn't mention the flowers, didn't mention the footsteps or the hand on my shoulder. I couldn't. How do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? But I knew what I'd felt, what I'd experienced, and I knew I never wanted to go back into that wing again. The next day, I did some research. I looked up room 27 in the hospital's old records, trying to find out who had died there, trying to make sense of the flowers and the cards. What I found made everything so much worse. Room 27 hadn't been a patient room in the traditional sense. It had been an observation room, a place where medical students and residents would watch surgeries through a viewing window. But back in the 70s, there had been an accident. A fire broke out in the surgical suite below, and the observation room had filled with smoke. 17 people had been trapped inside, medical students mostly, unable to get out because the door had jammed. They'd all died from smoke inhalation, clawing at the walls and door, trying desperately to escape. The hospital had covered it up as best they could, settled with the families out of court, and eventually moved on. But the room had never been used again. They'd converted it to storage, then just left it empty when they closed the east wing. I realized then what the flowers were. They weren't from loved ones of patients. They were from the families of those 17 medical students, people who'd been leaving flowers for decades, sneaking into the closed wing to leave remembrances for children who had died pursuing their dreams of becoming doctors. And the footsteps, the hand on my shoulder, those were the students themselves, still trapped in that wing, still trying to find a way out. I requested a transfer to a different shift, one where I wouldn't have to patrol the East Wing. My supervisor looked at me strangely, but approved it. I've been on the day shift for 3 months now, and I haven't had to go back there. But sometimes late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I can still smell those rotting flowers, and I can still feel that cold hand on my shoulder pressing down, as if someone is trying to tell me something. Trying to make me understand that they're still there, still trapped, still waiting for someone to let them out. They don't tell you about the morgue when you sign up for hospital security. Oh, they mention it in passing during training, usually just a casual, you'll need to do rounds down there too, but they never really prepare you for what it's like. The cold, sure, everyone knows, morgues are kept cold, but it's more than that. It's the silence, the way sound seems to die before it can echo, and it's the smell, that chemical smell of preservation that gets into your clothes and your hair and follows you home. I'm Marcus, and I've been working security at County General for 2 years. The morgue is in the sub-basement, 2 floors below ground level, accessed by a service elevator that's so old it still has an operator's cage door you have to pull shut manually. The first time I went down there, my trainer, an older guy named Bill who'd been with the hospital for 20 years, gave me one piece of advice. Don't look in the drawers, he said. No matter what you hear, no matter what you think you see, don't open those drawers. That's not part of your job, and trust me, you don't want to see what's inside. I thought he was just trying to spook the new guy, but his face was dead serious, and there was something in his eyes, a haunted look that told me he'd learned that lesson the hard way. So I followed his advice. I did my rounds, checked the doors and windows, made sure the temperature monitors were working, and I never, ever looked in the drawers. For the first year, everything was fine. The morgue was creepy, sure, but it was just a room, just a place where bodies were kept until their families could claim them, where they could be sent for autopsy. I got used to the cold, got used to the smell, got used to the absolute silence that seemed to swallow every sound. I even got used to the way the lights would flicker sometimes, throwing shadows that looked almost alive for just a second before the power stabilized. Then, about 6 months ago, things started to change. I began noticing sounds during my rounds, subtle things at first, like the soft whoosh of the refrigeration units cycling on and off, but then louder, stranger sounds. Scratching, like fingernails on metal. Soft thuds, like something hitting the inside of the drawer units. And once, just once, I heard what sounded like someone crying, a soft, hopeless sobbing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I told myself it was just the building settling, just pipes and HVAC systems doing what old buildings do. But deep down, I knew better. Deep down, I knew exactly what I was hearing, and the knowledge terrified me. I started rushing through my morgue rounds, spending as little time down there as possible, always keeping my eyes forward, never letting myself look at the drawer units that lined the walls like metal filing cabinets for the dead. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday, around 3 in the morning, and I was doing my usual sweep of the sub-basement. As soon as the elevator doors opened, I knew something was wrong. The temperature was off. The morgue was always cold, kept at a steady 38 degrees Fahrenheit, but tonight it felt warm, almost tropical, and the air was thick with humidity that had no business being there. I stepped out of the elevator, my hand instinctively going to my radio, ready to call for backup if I needed it. The lights were flickering worse than usual, creating a strobe effect that made everything look jerky and wrong, like watching an old film reel. And the smell, oh God, the smell. The usual chemical preservation smell was still there, but underneath it was something else, something organic and rotten, the smell of decay that no amount of formaldehyde could mask. I forced myself to move forward, checking the temperature controls first. They showed normal readings, 38 degrees, but I was sweating, the warmth oppressive and wrong. That's when I noticed that one of the drawer units was open, not just unlocked, but fully extended, the metal tray pulled out into the room. And it wasn't empty. There was a body on the tray, covered with a white sheet that was stained with something dark, something that looked like it was spreading even as I watched. I knew I should call someone, knew I should report this and let the medical staff handle it, but something made me move closer. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was some misguided sense of duty, or maybe it was something else, some invisible hand pushing me forward, making me look. I reached out, my hand shaking, and pulled back the sheet. The body underneath was old, the skin gray and mottled with livor mortis, the eyes sunken back into the skull. But those eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling with an expression of absolute horror, and as I watched, they moved. They shifted in their sockets and focused on me, and then the mouth opened, lips pulling back from yellowed teeth and something that might have been a smile, or might have been a scream frozen on dead lips. I stumbled backward, dropping the sheet, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The body didn't move, didn't sit up or reach for me like something out of a horror movie, but I could feel it watching me. Could feel the weight of that dead gaze following me as I backed toward the elevator. And then, from all around me, I heard the drawers start to open. One by one, with mechanical precision, every single drawer in the morgue began to extend, metal scraping on metal, each one revealing another sheet-covered form. I ran for the elevator, my fingers fumbling with the cage door, pulling it shut just as I heard the first thud behind me. I slammed my hand on the button for the ground floor, and as the elevator lurched upward, I looked back into the morgue. Every drawer was fully extended now, and some of the sheets were moving, bulging, and shifting as if the things underneath were trying to sit up, trying to free themselves from the fabric. The elevator doors closed, cutting off my view, and I slumped against the wall, gasping for breath. When I reached the ground floor, I stumbled out and immediately went to find my supervisor. I told him everything, about the heat, about the body with the moving eyes, about all the drawers opening at once. He listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with each word, and when I finished, he just nodded. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared into his office. He came back a few minutes later with a file, an old file with yellowed pages and coffee stains on the cover. "Read this," he said, handing it to me. "Then decide if you still want to work here." I opened the file and started reading. It was an incident report from 1987, written by a security guard named Thomas Brennan. He described almost exactly what I'd just experienced: the heat, the open drawers, the body with the moving eyes. But his report went further. He'd gone back down to the morgue with backup, and they'd found all the bodies out of their drawers, arranged on the floor in a circle, all facing inward toward a single empty space in the center. The medical examiner had been called, and after examining the bodies, he confirmed that they showed signs of having been moved recently, despite having been dead for days or even weeks. There was no explanation for how it had happened, no evidence of anyone breaking in, no footage on the security cameras. The bodies had simply moved themselves, arranged themselves in that pattern for reasons no one could understand. The report concluded with a recommendation that the morgue be blessed by a chaplain and that additional security measures be put in place, but there was a handwritten note at the bottom, added years later. Incidents continued. All guards instructed not to enter morgue alone after midnight. Buddy system mandatory. It was signed by my supervisor. I looked up at him, this man I'd worked with for 2 years, who'd never mentioned any of this, who'd sent me down to that morgue alone dozens of times. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. He sighed and rubbed his face. "Because if we told people, no one would take the job, and someone has to check on the morgue. Hospital policy, insurance requirements, all that bureaucratic nonsense. So we just don't talk about it, and we hope nothing happens." "Hope?" I said, my voice rising. "You hope nothing happens?" I just saw a dead body move its eyes, saw every drawer in that place open by itself, and your solution is to hope? He held up his hands, placating. "Look, I'm sorry. You're right, we should have warned you. But here's the thing, Marcus. In all the years this has been happening, nothing has actually hurt anyone. The bodies move, sure, drawers open, people hear things, see things. But no one's been attacked, no one's been injured. It's like they're trying to tell us something, not hurt us. I wanted to quit right then, wanted to walk out and never come back. But I needed this job, needed the paycheck and the benefits, and despite everything, despite the horror of what I just witnessed, I found myself curious. What were they trying to tell us? What message were the dead trying to convey that was so important they literally rose from their drawers to communicate it? Against my better judgment, I agreed to keep working, but only with the buddy system in place. From that night on, I never went to the morgue alone. My partner was usually this younger guy named David, fresh out of college and still convinced that everything had a rational explanation. He didn't believe me when I told him what I'd seen, thought I was exaggerating or had fallen asleep and dreamed the whole thing, but he came with me anyway, more out of obligation than actual concern. For weeks, nothing happened. The morgue was just a morgue, cold and quiet, and exactly what it was supposed to be. David started making jokes about it, calling it the haunted filing cabinet and doing bad ghost impressions whenever we went down there. I didn't laugh. I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it happened again. Last week, my feeling proved correct. David and I went down for the midnight check, and as soon as we stepped off the elevator, we both felt it. The temperature was wrong again, too warm, and there was that smell, that horrible organic rot smell underneath the chemicals. David stopped joking immediately. "What is that?" he whispered, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "That's what I tried to tell you about," I said, moving forward carefully. "We found them in the autopsy suite, the room adjacent to the main morgue where the medical examiner performed post-mortems. Every body that had been in storage was there, laid out on the floor in that same circular pattern from the 1987 report. But this time, there was something in the center of the circle. It was a piece of paper, old and yellowed, with words written on it in what looked like dried blood. David made a move toward it, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I said. "We need to call someone, the chaplain maybe, or the medical examiner." But David pulled free and walked into the circle before I could stop him. He bent down and picked up the paper, and as soon as his fingers touched it, every single body in the circle sat up at once. I've never heard David scream like that before. These bodies, some of them days old, some of them weeks old, all sat up in perfect unison, their dead eyes opening, their mouths moving like they were trying to speak. David dropped the paper and scrambled backward, and I pulled him out of the autopsy suite, both of us running for the elevator like our lives depended on it. We made it out, got to the ground floor, and immediately reported what we'd seen. This time they took us seriously. The hospital administrator, the chaplain, even the director of security all went down to the morgue together. When they came back up, they were pale and shaken, but they wouldn't tell us what they found. All they said was that the morgue would be closed for cleaning and that we shouldn't worry about it, But I did worry. I worried because before we'd run, before the panic had completely taken over, I'd caught a glimpse of what was written on that paper. Just 2 words repeated over and over in that bloody script. Remember us. Remember us. Remember us. I realized then what the dead were trying to tell us. They didn't want to hurt anyone. They just didn't want to be forgotten. They wanted someone to know that they'd existed, that they'd lived and breathed and mattered, even if their lives had ended on a cold metal tray in a hospital morgue. And by ignoring them, by pretending they were just bodies, just things to be stored and processed and eventually buried or cremated, we were forgetting them. Now, when I do my rounds in the morgue, I do something different. I read the toe tags. Every single one. I say the names out loud, acknowledge that these were people, not just bodies. John Doe, we remember you. Jane Smith, we remember you. It takes longer, makes my rounds run late, but since I started doing it, the morgue has been quiet. No more moving bodies, no more opening drawers, just the cold and the silence and the smell of chemicals. David quit the next day. I don't blame him. But I stayed, because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to bear witness to the fact that these people existed, even if it's just reading their names in an empty morgue in the middle of the night. It's the least we can do for the dead. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and I'm a security guard at Mercy Hospital, a mid-sized facility in what used to be a nice suburban area but has slowly been swallowed by urban sprawl. I've been here for 4 years, and for the most part, it's been a good job. Decent pay, good benefits, and most nights are quiet enough that I can catch up on my audiobooks between rounds. But there's one part of the hospital I hate, one place that makes my skin crawl every time I have to go there. The pediatric wing. I know what you're thinking. Why would the pediatric wing be scary? It's where kids are treated, where families come together to help their children heal. It should be one of the safer, more hopeful parts of the hospital, and during the day, it is. The walls are painted with cheerful murals, cartoon characters, and rainbows and smiling suns. There's a playroom full of toys and books, and the nurses are some of the kindest people I've ever met, always ready with a smile and a joke to help scared kids feel better. But at night, when most of the kids are asleep and the hallways are dim, the pediatric wing changes. The cheerful murals look sinister in the low light, those smiling cartoon faces taking on a mocking quality. The playroom, visible through windows that line the hallway, looks less like a place of joy and more like a stage set, waiting for actors who will never come. And then there's the music. It started about 6 months ago. I was doing my regular 2 a.m. rounds, walking through the pediatric wing with my flashlight, checking doors and windows. Everything was quiet, just the usual hospital sounds, the beep of monitors, the occasional cry of a child waking from a bad dream. Then I heard it. Music, soft and tinny, like it was coming from an old music box. It was playing a lullaby, something familiar that I couldn't quite place, and it was coming from the playroom. I walked over to the windows and looked inside. The room was dark except for the glow from the hallway lights, and I could see the toys scattered around, dolls and stuffed animals and building blocks. The music was definitely coming from in there, and as I listened I realized what song it was. Hush, Little Baby. But it was playing slowly, almost reluctantly, like the mechanism was winding down. I tried the door, but it was locked, which it should have been. The playroom was always secured at night to keep patients from wandering in unsupervised. I shone my flashlight through the window trying to find the source of the music, and that's when I saw her. In the back corner of the room, sitting on one of the small plastic chairs, was a little girl. She was wearing a hospital gown and had an IV pole beside her, and she was holding something in her lap, turning it over and over in her hands. Even from a distance, I could see it was a music box. "Hey, sweetie," I called through the window, tapping on the glass. "You're not supposed to be in there. Let me open the door and get you back to your room, okay?" She didn't look up, didn't give any indication she'd heard me. Just kept turning the music box in her hands, that slow, creepy lullaby playing over and over. I fumbled with my keys, found the one for the playroom, and unlocked the door. "It's okay, honey. I'm just here to help you get back to bed." I stepped into the room, and the temperature dropped immediately. It went from comfortable to freezing in an instant, my breath coming out in visible puffs. The little girl finally looked up at me, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. She was pale, so pale her skin was almost translucent, and her eyes were dark, not just brown or black, but truly dark, like looking into deep water at night. And she was smiling, but it wasn't a child's smile. It was knowing and cold and completely devoid of innocence. "Do you want to play with me?" she asked, her voice high and sweet and completely at odds with that horrible smile. I took a step backward, my instincts screaming at me to get out of that room, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, rooted to the spot. "I don't have anyone to play with anymore," she continued, standing up from her chair. The music box fell from her hands and clattered to the floor, but the music didn't stop. If anything, it got louder, that distorted lullaby filling the room. "The other children won't play with me. They say I'm scary. Am I scary?" She tilted her head to the side, and I heard a crack like bones breaking, like her neck was twisting further than it should be able to. "I don't mean to be scary. I just get lonely. It's so lonely here at night with no one to talk to, no one to play with. Will you play with me?" I finally found my voice. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to sound calm even though I was terrified. Maybe if I could get her name, I could find out what room she belonged in, could get a nurse to come help me. She stopped walking and seemed to consider the question. I don't remember, she said finally. I've been here so long, I don't remember my name anymore. But you can call me whatever you want. You can call me friend. She started moving toward me again, and this time I managed to break free from whatever was holding me in place. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a pile of toys, and ran for the door. Behind me I heard her laugh, high and bright and delighted, like we were playing a game. Run, run as fast as you can, she sang. But you'll come back. Everyone always comes back. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key to turn. Through the window, I could see her standing in the middle of the playroom, still smiling that horrible smile. And as I watched, she waved at me, a small, cheerful wave that made my blood run cold. Then she turned and walked back to her chair in the corner, sat down, and vanished. Just disappeared like she'd never been there at all. I called for backup, got another guard to come meet me, a guy named Robert who'd been at Mercy even longer than I had. When I told him what happened, he just nodded grimly. You saw the girl, he said. Should have warned you about her. She shows up sometimes, usually in the playroom, sometimes in the hallways. Nobody knows who she is or why she's here, but she's been appearing for years. Years? I said, incredulous. This has been happening for years and nobody told me? Robert shrugged. What were we supposed to say? Hey, new guard, watch out for the ghost girl in the pediatric wing. You would have thought we were crazy. Besides, she's never hurt anyone, just scares them. After a while, you get used to it. But I didn't get used to it. Every time I have to do rounds in the pediatric wing, I feel her watching me. Even when I don't see her, even when there's no music and no signs of anything unusual, I can feel her presence, can sense those dark eyes following me as I walk. And sometimes, when I'm checking the playroom windows, I'll see a small handprint on the inside of the glass, tiny fingers pressed against the cold surface, like someone is trying to get out. I started asking around, trying to find out more about the girl, about who she might have been. The older nurses remembered stories, passed down from their predecessors, about a little girl who died in the pediatric wing back in the 80s. She'd been sick for a long time, leukemia or cancer, no one remembered exactly, and toward the end, she'd become withdrawn and strange, talking to people who weren't there, playing by herself in the playroom for hours. When she died, it was alone. Her parents had just stepped out to get coffee, and in those brief minutes, she'd passed away, no one holding her hand, no one there to comfort her. The nurses had found her half an hour later, already cold, and they said her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with an expression of such profound loneliness that it haunted them for years afterward. After I learned that, I started to understand. The girl in the playroom wasn't malicious or evil. She was just lonely, desperately, achingly lonely, trapped in a place between life and death with no one to talk to, no one to play with, no one to ease that endless solitude. And she was reaching out the only way she knew how, by appearing to people, by asking them to play, by trying to make a connection with anyone who could see her. It didn't make her any less frightening, but it did make her more sad. Now, when I do my rounds in the pediatric wing, when I check the playroom and see her sitting in that chair in the corner, I don't run anymore. I stop, and I wave, and sometimes I'll say, hello, I see you, you're not alone. And she'll smile, a real smile this time, small and grateful, and then she'll fade away, her loneliness eased for just a little while. I don't know if what I'm doing helps. I don't know if it makes any difference to a ghost, to a spirit trapped in an endless loop of isolation. But I keep doing it anyway, because if there's even a chance that it brings her some small measure of comfort, some brief respite from her loneliness, then it's worth it. No one should be alone, not in life and not in death, and if all I can offer is acknowledgement, recognition that she exists and matters, then that's what I'll give. I'm the overnight security supervisor at Harbor Medical Center, and I've been in this position for 7 years. I've seen a lot in that time, dealt with everything from aggressive patients to attempted break-ins, but nothing prepared me for what happened 3 months ago in the psychiatric ward. Harbor Medical has a small psych unit on the 5th floor, about 20 beds for patients dealing with acute mental health crises. It's a locked unit, meaning patients can't leave without authorization, and it's staffed 24 hours a day by specially trained nurses and psychiatric technicians. My job is to do regular security checks, make sure the doors and windows are secure, and respond if there's a violent or potentially dangerous situation. The unit has always made me a little uncomfortable, even before the incident. There's something about the atmosphere up there. The combination of the locked doors and reinforced windows, and the knowledge that everyone on the other side of those doors is struggling with something invisible and potentially dangerous. The patients are usually quiet at night, sedated, or just exhausted from dealing with their conditions, but sometimes you'll hear screaming or crying or the manic laughter of someone in the grip of a psychotic episode. On this particular night, it was around 1 a.m. when I got the call from the nurses' station on 5. It was Jenny, one of the senior psych nurses, and she sounded worried. "We need you up here. One of our patients is missing." I grabbed my radio and headed for the elevators. "Missing? How is that possible? Aren't the doors locked?" Jenny's voice crackled over the radio. "They are. All the doors are locked, windows are secure, but she's not in her room, and we can't find her anywhere on the unit." When I got to the 5th floor, the nursing staff had already done a thorough search. They checked every patient room, every bathroom, the day room, the quiet rooms, everywhere. The patient, a woman named Rebecca Marsh, had simply vanished. Her room showed no signs of a struggle. The bed was made. Her belongings were untouched. She just disappeared. What was she in for? I asked, pulling up her chart on the computer at the nurse's station. Jenny glanced at the screen and frowned. Severe psychosis with paranoid delusions. She kept insisting that the walls were watching her, that there were people living inside the walls who wanted to take her away. We had her on antipsychotics, but she was still pretty delusional when she came in yesterday. Living inside the walls. The phrase stuck with me, tickled something in the back of my mind. I looked around the unit, really looked at it, and for the first time I noticed something odd. The walls on this floor were thicker than they should be, bulkier than the walls on the other floors of the hospital, and there were sections that didn't quite make sense architecturally, spaces that seemed like they should be rooms but were just blank walls. When was this unit built? I asked. Jenny thought for a moment. The hospital opened in the 50s, but the psych ward was renovated in the 80s. Why? I didn't answer, just started walking the perimeter of the unit, running my hands along the walls, tapping occasionally to test the sound. Most of it was solid, just normal hospital construction, but in one section, near the back hallway, the sound changed. It was hollow, like there was empty space behind the wall. I knocked harder, and I heard something. A faint sound, like someone tapping back. Did you hear that? I asked, and Jenny nodded, her face pale. Oh God, is she in the walls? We got maintenance up immediately, and they brought tools to open up the wall. What we found behind the plaster and studs was a narrow space, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It was old ductwork from before the renovation, sealed off but not filled in, creating a network of crawl spaces that ran throughout the entire 5th floor. And sitting in one of these spaces, her back against the dusty metal, was Rebecca. She was alive but unresponsive, staring straight ahead with wide, unblinking eyes. We pulled her out carefully, got her back to her room, and the doctor examined her. Physically, she was fine, just some scrapes and bruises from crawling through the ducts, but mentally, she wouldn't speak, wouldn't react to anything we said or did. She just stared, that blank, empty stare that seemed to look through everything and everyone. The next day, we tried to figure out how she'd gone into the walls in the first place. We searched her room and found a small access panel behind her dresser, one that should have been screwed shut but had somehow come loose. The maintenance crew swore they'd secured all the panels during the renovation, but here was proof that at least one had failed. Rebecca stayed catatonic for 3 days. Then, on the 4th day, she started talking, but what she said made no sense. She kept repeating the same phrases over and over. They're still in there. They never left. They're watching to the walls. We assumed it was just her psychosis, the same delusion she'd been admitted for, but then other patients started saying similar things. A man who'd been admitted for severe depression suddenly became agitated, claiming he could hear whispers coming from the walls at night. A woman with bipolar disorder refused to sleep, saying she could see shadows moving behind the plaster. And a teenager admitted for a suicide attempt scratched at the walls in his room until his fingers bled, insisting he had to get them out, had to free them before it was too late. The psychiatric staff tried to dismiss it as shared delusions, a kind of folie à plusieurs where one patient's psychotic beliefs spread to others. But I wasn't so sure. I started spending more time on the 5th floor, especially at night, listening, watching. And I began to notice things I'd missed before, cold spots in certain sections of the hallway, sounds that didn't quite fit, soft scraping noises that seemed to come from inside the walls. And once, just once, I saw something that I can't explain. It was around 3 a.m., and I was doing my rounds. The unit was quiet, most patients asleep or at least resting. I was walking past one of the blank walls, one of those sections that seemed architecturally wrong, when I saw something move. Not on the wall, but in it, like there was something just beneath the surface, pressing outward. The wall bulged slightly, and for just a second I could see the outline of a hand, fingers spread wide, pushing against the plaster from the inside. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, and when I looked again, the wall was smooth and normal, but I knew what I'd seen. There was something in those walls, something that had been sealed up during the renovation, either accidentally or deliberately, and it was still there, trapped in the dark spaces between the rooms, aware and angry and desperate to get out. I went to my supervisor with what I'd found, what I'd seen, but he brushed it off. He said I was spending too much time around the psych patients, that their delusions were affecting my judgment, but I couldn't let it go. I started researching the hospital's history, digging through old records and newspaper archives, looking for anything that might explain what was happening on the 5th floor. What I found made my blood run cold. Before the renovation in the 80s, the psychiatric unit had been much larger, taking up most of the 5th and 6th floors. But there had been problems, allegations of patient abuse, reports of experimental treatments that crossed ethical lines. The hospital had shut down the old unit, conducted an investigation, and several staff members had been fired. But here's the thing that nobody talked about. The thing that was buried in sealed legal documents and confidential settlement agreements. During that time, several patients had gone missing. The official explanation was that they'd escaped, run away from the hospital, but their bodies were never found, and their families insisted they would never have left voluntarily. 5 patients, all with severe mental illnesses, all vanished within a 6-month period in 1982. And the renovation that happened right after those disappearances? It had involved sealing off large sections of the old unit, building new walls, creating the smaller, more manageable psychiatric ward that exists today. What if those patients hadn't escaped? What if they'd been hidden, sealed up in the walls during the renovation, left to die in the dark spaces between the rooms? I brought my findings to the hospital administration, and after a lot of resistance and legal wrangling, they finally agreed to investigate. They brought in a team with ground-penetrating radar and started scanning the walls of the 5th floor. It took them 2 weeks to complete the survey, and what they found confirmed my worst fears. There were 5 anomalies in the walls, spaces where the radar suggested something organic, something that shouldn't be there. They opened up the walls carefully, section by section, and what they found were remains. Human remains, 5 sets, all in various states of preservation, all hidden in sealed sections of ductwork or crawl spaces that had been deliberately walled off during the 1982 renovation. The hospital tried to keep it quiet, but the families of the missing patients have been fighting for answers for decades, and now they finally had them. There were lawsuits, settlements, criminal investigations into the staff members who'd been working at the hospital in the early 80s. Some were dead, some were too old and infirm to prosecute, but the truth finally came out. Those 5 patients had been hidden, left to die, and then sealed up in the walls to cover up the crime. The psych ward was shut down for 3 months while they did a complete renovation, removing the old ductwork, filling in the crawl spaces, giving those 5 people a proper burial. When the unit reopened, it felt different, cleaner somehow, like something dark and heavy had been lifted. Rebecca Marsh was still a patient when all of this came to light, and when she was told what they'd found, she smiled for the first time since they pulled her out of the walls. "I told you," she said. "I told you they were in there watching, waiting for someone to find them." She wasn't delusional after all. She'd been right the entire time, sensitive to something the rest of us couldn't perceive, feeling the presence of those trapped souls crying out for help. I still work at Harvard Medical, still do my security rounds on the 5th floor, but now when I walk those hallways, I say a small prayer for the 5 who were lost. The 5 who died alone in the dark, trapped and forgotten. And I listen, always listen, because you never know when someone might be crying out for help, when someone might need to be found and remembered and finally set free. That brings us to the end of tonight's stories. Thank you for spending your time with us and listening until the very end. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps support what we do here. New true horror stories are uploaded every week, perfect for late nights and sleepless hours. If you have a true horror story you'd like to share and be featured in a future episode, you can send it to our email. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your lights low, and sleep well. Good night.